Okay, we are going to talk about hips today. Your hips are so different with every body, just like every bone and joint. But hips are something that are easily overdone, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand how the hips and yoga kind of play hand in hand as far as keeping hip mobility, yet not overdoing it. So I'll kind of explain what I mean. That's a little bit confusing, but I will explain. We're going to go over a few poses that will just enhance almost anyone's hip mobility and flexibility. And I'll give you a little bit of yoga theory or hip education as well. So most people are either internal rotation hips or external rotation hips. Some people, one side is more of an external rotation hip and the other side's more of an internal rotation hip. So it can be kind of interesting to do different yoga poses and see what your body is. But now you'll know how to pay attention to figuring that out. So we'll just start with a butterfly pose. So our feet face each other and they can touch or just face one another, the bottoms of the feet. And then you can have them farther out away from your body or closer in. All of that is going to depend on your knees, but mainly on your hips, okay? So this is an external rotation because we're going away from the midline. Now, I highly, highly, highly suggest using blocks, okay? There's some negative stigma attached to blocks that doesn't need to be. I have extremely open hips. So if I continue to overly or 100% do hip openers, that's going to cause issues in my hip joints eventually. You can overdo it easily, especially if you're repeating something that you're already really open in that area. You're just going to make that mobility turn into a bad thing, okay? So for me, to keep me at a moderate level with my hip opener, I use blocks. They have different heights depending on where you want to be, and it doesn't have to be blocks. If you think that's uncomfortable, you can just roll a blanket and it's going to do the same thing, but having some support to stabilize the hip joints, okay? So sitting in butterfly and seeing how you're feeling. If having your knees wide feels okay, you're probably pretty open in your hips and your external rotator. So internal rotations for you are going to feel a little bit more uncomfortable than the hip openers. So we'll switch to an internal rotation. And that's going to be anytime your leg crosses the midline, okay? So shoelace is a great seated hip pose, and it's an internal rotation on both sides. So half shoelace is going to be crossing the leg over. So here's just this in itself is an internal rotation, because what your femur is doing is moving sideways. So your femur's across your midline, okay? But shoelace, we bring this ankle back towards the hip. So that's a more intense internal rotation. And then deciding whether or not to bring the other foot back towards the hip, okay? So half shoelace is still an internal rotation. You'll still be able to feel if that's more comfortable or a little more uncomfortable in your hip joint than that butterfly was. And then if you're doing half shoelace, you'll want to do both legs, because like I said, one can be external and one can be internal. And then deciding if you want to wrap the foot around and then if you want to wrap the other foot around. So this is really going to give you a good idea between which one you are. Okay, and if both of them feel fine, then you're both, or you're more of a neutral to where you don't lean, okay, I'm either external or I'm internal, which is a little bit more rare. Typically you're one or the other, or one leg is one and one leg is the other. But yeah, that's pretty rare. So let's go into some other stuff. As far as strengthening your hips, what are good things to do? Bridge is always a great thing to do. And you can intensify bridge and you can lower the intensity of bridge pretty easily. For those of you who don't know, I'll just do a bridge super quick. It's where you're lying on your back and my feet are gonna get kind of cut off, maybe my head, but we're more concerned with what's happening with your hips. So you lay your head down, you push through the feet, and you lift the hips as high or as low off the ground as comfortable for you. But you really want to squeeze the glutes, okay? So this is strengthening all of this. It's using your abs, you're strengthening your back, strengthening your glutes. In turn, keeping those hips strong. All right, and then you lower down. A supported bridge is always an option too. So having a blanket under the bridge, I will still say it's necessary to keep the glutes tight, engage the abs. Okay, so all the work that you're doing when the blanket isn't there still needs to be, those areas need to be active. That way you're getting the same benefits out of the pose, whether it's supported or not supported. All right, so chair is another great one. That's going to strengthen those areas as well. Just a standing chair, half chair is a little bit more balanced, focused. All right, so the last pose I'm going to show you is an internal and an external rotation at the same time. So, like I said, pay attention to your hips, see what feels different, what feels comfortable, uncomfortable. So it's called deer, and it's done a lot in yin classes and held for a longer period of time. But what it is, so we'll start with our left foot near our hips, left knee's bent. We're gonna take the right foot down like this. So the right ankle is gonna come towards your right back pocket, okay? Now, these don't have to be as close to the body as I just had them, right? So they can be farther out. But here you have your external rotation and here you have your internal rotation. So you're doing both at once. And then of course, switching to the other side. Okay. All right. So I want you to play around with those. Oh, if you wanted to. For another hip opener, because it's my favorite, you can do frog. So if you widen your knees and lower down to your forearms, engage the core, tighten the glutes. You can always have something under your knees. And then the option for a supported frog is always there too. So you can take kind of the work off of your core if you wanted. If you wanted a nice hip opener where gravity is doing a lot of the work, this would be perfect. You can also do one leg at a time. So just have the left knee up and the right leg you can't see, but is just extended straight back. And then switching to the other side. So that was frog pose. We did deer with the internal and the external rotation at the same time. We did butterfly, which was the first pose, which was the hip opener. You can also do a half butterfly on that. So if you wanted one leg straight and then have one leg supported. if you wanted to do it that way, totally fine. There are also other versions of these poses and modifications. This is just a basis to go off of for hips. And what was the last one we did? Shoelace. Half shoelace or full shoelace. So that's going to be your internal rotation where your legs crossed. But yeah, so there's internal rotations, external rotations, and both at the same time. So I hope you learned something new about your body while you are experimenting with these. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me and I hopefully have an answer for you. Okay, have a good day.